Hi, this is Candace, and I'm going to be talking about assessing Kirkpatrick's Level 3, which is behavior. So when we're talking about Level 2, we were asking, can the participants do something? And we do it right at the end of the training session to see if they learned what it is that we were trying to get across. Level 3 is more about whether the students retain and then are able to use the skills that we taught them. And so the big difference there is usually that there is some time elapsed. A rule of thumb is usually about 4 to 6 weeks after the training session. Did it stick? Are they using it? I was thinking about this recently because I was using the Duolingo app to teach myself Spanish, and I'm rocking it. I'm like getting the badges, I'm getting on the lead board, I'm unlocking little treasures along the way. But the real test is when I travel to Mexico next March with my husband to see if I can actually speak Spanish when I get there. That's going to be a level 3. I'm doing well at level 2. How am I doing at level 3? Check back and I'll let you know. So the assessment indicator is tied to the student learning outcomes, and you're going to have your student learning outcome and then see if within the student paper or project they actually succeeded at each of them. And here is the most important part. It must be aligned with the professor's assignment, because we have had some spectacular failures where we had a measurement that we wanted to do and it turned out the professor was not actually making students do that, and that didn't work out too well. Let me go through some example. Here are 3 learning outcomes that are really common in information literacy. Students will be able to utilize basic research skills to find appropriate sources. Students will be able to create accurate in-text citations and references using an approved documentation style. Students will be able to evaluate sources for credibility. If you think of your average freshman composition paper, the thing that this freshmen turn at the end of the semester, 5 to 8 pages, has all their sources at the end. They use the sources in their paper. But if it's just the paper itself, number 1 and number 3 aren't going to be part of that final paper. So if you have a rubric and then you try to use it on a freshman composition paper, it's not going to work out for you. In our case, years ago, we tried to use a rubric on an annotated bibliography. And I thought that all the professors were having within the annotations that the professors were telling their students to describe how they found the source and then use APA references to cite the sources and then talk about the credibility. Well, it turned out that a lot of the professors forgot to include the detail to their students to tell them that they should share how they found the source. So for most of the papers, I had to rate it a 0 as not there because the professors just hadn't asked for that information. And that I've noticed to be a big problem with a lot of people who try to use rubrics. Librarians will create a rubric and not actually consult with the professor whose artifact they're using to see what it is that the professor is requiring the students to write or present. So some of the most common methods are pre- and post-test, artifact analysis, and observed behaviors. And in all cases, you're probably going to be using a rubric. Multiple choice questions are not a good use of level 3 because we want to see if they can actually use and apply their skills. When I say pre and post test then, I'm not talking about a little quiz they take before and after, but instead, let's say they do a little baby research paper or a draft paper before a library session and then they write a final one afterwards. You compare and contrast those 2 papers. And artifact analysis is probably the most common thing done at level 3, and that's where you collect the annotated bibliography, the research narrative, the research paper, whatever it is that the students are supposed to create based on your library session. The final one I haven't used, but I think could be interesting, is observed behavior. And that is kind of like a usability study where you recruit some students a month or so after they've had their session with you, and then send them on a computer and ask them a question like, where would you go to find scholarly articles about rap music and whether it is misogynistic? And you see what they do, and then you record their path. I think it's a little artificial. I'm not quite sure it's level 3 because are they actually using it in their courses? I'm not sure it's authentic enough, but I think it is interesting, and if anyone's done something like that, I'd love to hear about it. So a few tips. As you probably could tell that from last week's level 2 assignment, level 3 is really time consuming. If you are going through a whole paper, not just a worksheet, right? You're looking through a whole student paper and you have a rubric, it can take a lot of time. Sampling is really your best friend in this. Rule of thumb is you want to use about 10% of your potential pool. We did a project just last winter. We had 400 papers, and so we coded 40 of them, and that worked perfectly. We got really good results from that. And because this level 3 is so intensive, we really recommend that you work with a team. If you're lucky enough to be at a R1 or a larger university and you have someone like Eric, a head of assessment within the library, by all means work with them. If you don't have an in-house source, perhaps there's a professor of education or office of assessment on your campus that you can work with, because you really need to have a well-built rubric. It's just heartbreaking when you build a rubric and then about 2 or 3 papers in you realize that it's not working. And if you have gone through any kind of institutional review board in order to get this approved for research as well as assessment, a lot of time has been invested and you can't change it. That would be very, very sad. So you want to do everything you can to have a successful rubric. We also have some readings on creating rubrics, and that can be a guide too. If you have other instruction librarians or librarians who do instruction that you can work with, that is really helpful. General rule is that you want to do at least 2 people to code each artifact. That provides some validity. If you can't, if it's only you, that's all right, because especially if the assessment is just for you, it's just internal use, you're not going to be publishing on it or sharing it with the campus. The most important thing is that you do it, right? But if you do have 2 coders, then think about integrated reliability and do norming. So we have a couple of articles for you to possibly read in the supplemental reading. One by Making Oakleaf. It's all about how to do norming. And when I say norming, it means that you and your fellow coders get together and you take 10 artifacts from your pool, and then you practice. You fill out the rubric. So you pass one around, you all fill out the rubric, and then you compare results and discuss. And then you do it again, and then you do it again, and then you do it again. And after about 5, you're going to all start being very consistent amongst yourselves as well as within yourself. And that is another item that came up in the discussion boards from level 2, was this idea of objectivity and how the level 2 assessment wouldn't be objective. In the supplemental reading again, I have a brief little thing by Eric about how objectivity is kind of a social construct. It's kind of interesting. I encourage you to read it. But the bottom line is that what you're looking for is consistency. You want to have a consistent look at the papers. So definitely this week's supplemental reading, there's some good stuff there. And then you also need to adjust your expectations. The time gap means that there can be a lot of things that intervene in between the time you do library instruction and by the time the students write their paper. So the correlation to your one-shot is going to be weaker. You don't know if in the 4 or 6 weeks in between the time they came to the library and when they did their final paper, whether their professor had the whole class bring their laptops to the computer and then he or she did a bunch of sessions with them. You don't know if the students were asking friends or the research help desk or what else happened. So of course you can still say that this section came to the library and this happened with their paper, and there is a relationship there. But you have to be careful not to overstress it and say that you caused something to happen in level 3. My group I have a team of 6 instruction librarians, and they have sometimes been frustrated with level 3 assessment because you can't really use it to improve your instruction at that time. You're measuring the students' information literacy skills, but you can't use that information to fix your instruction at that point. And it can be really frustrating when we get to the end of the semester and realize that, oh, they didn't get search strategy at all, or oh my goodness, I really should have spent more time on authority, right? So my group has found level 2 to be more useful because they'd like to know right away whether something isn't working so that they can make a change before they teach the next session. We have a very active library instruction program, so that's possible for us. But for level 3, you kind of have to let go. You can't hunt down the student, right? The papers we get are blinded. We don't know whose papers they are, so we can't go to the student and say, hey, let me show you what you did wrong, right? That's not part of level 3 assessment at all. And that's just something that you need to consider when planning such a project. But I think that there are some very good reasons to use level 3. One of them is if your instruction program is not like ours. What if you don't teach that many sessions? Or what if your sessions are very different from each other? You teach, so if you did a level 2 assessment for one class, it really wouldn't help you to plan for the next class. In that case, level 3 might be perfect for you. Also, level 3 is a great way to measure the students' information literacy skills and share it with an outside community like your campus. So you could do a workshop to the faculty of a department and say, here's what we learned about your majors based on this project. And it's very compelling. It's good evidence for you to share with people outside of the library.